The Secretary General is in Awasa, in Turkmenistan. He will attend the third United Nations Conference on landlocked developing countries that will begin on Tuesday. In his remarks to the conference tomorrow, the Secretary General will address the challenges facing landlocked developing countries, such as the steep barriers to trade, the high transport costs, and the limited access to global markets. He will also speak about solutions to overcome these obstacles. Today, the Secretary General met with the president of the host country, Sardar Berdimuhamedov. He thanked Turkmenistan for its generosity for hosting the conference. He is also scheduled to hold bilateral meetings on Tuesday with leaders and officials attending the conference. And yesterday, upon his arrival, the Secretary General met with Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, the national leader of the Turkmen people and chairman of the People's Council of Turkmenistan. We will share his remarks and also keep you updated on his meetings. Turkmenistan is the second and last stop in Mr. Guterres' visit to Central Asia. On Sunday, he was in Almaty in Kazakhstan. The Secretary General and the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, witnessed the signing of the host country agreement for the United Nations Regional Center for the Sustainable Development Goals for Central Asia and Afghanistan by Murat Nurtliu, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, and Li Junhua, the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. And you saw the readout that we issued yesterday following Mr. Guterres' meeting with the President of Kazakhstan. I've been asked about the videos of the Israeli hostages shown by Hamas, and I can tell you that the Secretary General is very shocked by this unacceptable violation of human dignity. Turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that many people reportedly continue to be killed and injured, including people seeking food along the UN convoy routes and militarized distribution points. Some 1,500 people have been reportedly killed since May. Meanwhile, our colleagues continue to risk their lives to provide life-saving assistance. On Sunday, Israeli airstrikes killed a health worker from the Palestine Red Crescent Society in Khan Yunis. Furthermore, yesterday, the Israeli military issued yet another displacement order in Gaza City, covering the neighborhood of Tufa. OCHA says that these orders continue to push people into overcrowded, unsafe areas with no shelters and essential supplies. OCHA reminds us that only 12% of Gaza is outside the Israeli militarized zone or areas affected by displacement orders. Our partners are still unable to respond to shelter needs due to zero stock, with no shelter supplies having entered Gaza since early March. In the past few days, the UN and our partners have managed to collect wheat flour, ready-to-eat rations, and hot meal commodities from the crossings. However, most of the cargo was offloaded by the hungry crowds before reaching its destinations. While nutrition supplies have entered during the past week, including high-energy biscuits for pregnant and breastfeeding women and infant formula and hygiene kits, UNICEF emphasized yesterday that this is still a fraction of what is needed and reminded that malnutrition among children in Gaza is reaching catastrophic levels. The UN and our partners reiterate that a ceasefire is critically needed to reach all those in need and urge for the continued facilitation of a sustained, uninterrupted, and scaled-up flow of aid, including commercial goods. Regarding fuel, yesterday the UN was able to collect about 200,000 liters from Kerem Shalom crossing. However, the limited quantities that have been entering Gaza since last week do not suffice to remedy the shortages. For example, water, sanitation, and hygiene operations continue to be affected by the lack of fuel. While some 70,000 liters of fuel are needed every day for emergency operations, only 29,000 liters have been received, which is far below the minimum quantity needed. In a welcome development, Israeli authorities have approved an increase in the number of fuel tankers that are allowed to enter per week. We will update you once we have clarity. As we enter the second week since the Israeli announcement of the tactical pause to allow safe passages for our convoys, colleagues tell us that realities on the ground remain largely the same. Aid that has entered remains by far insufficient for the starving population, and our convoys continue to face impediments on their way to delivering aid. Some missions inside Gaza take more than 18 hours to be completed. The teams are compelled to wait for more than 10 hours at a stretch on the roads, which are often dangerous, congested, or impassable. Yesterday, while 7 out of 11 missions requiring coordination with Israeli authorities were facilitated, OCHA tells us that 2 others were impeded. One to collect health items was not fully accomplished. One was canceled by the organizers. Turning to the West Bank, OCHA tells us that violence by Israeli forces and settlers against Palestinian communities continues unabated. Settler violence incidents are on the rise. Last week, OCHA documented at least 24 Israeli settler attacks against Palestinians that resulted in casualties, property damage, or both. OCHA reiterates its call for the protection of civilians in the West Bank, including Jerusalem. In southern Lebanon, the peacekeepers of the UN Interim Force in Lebanon have observed continued Israeli Defense Forces military activities, including air attacks by fighter jets and drones, as well as direct firing from south of the Blue Line in Sector East. UNIFIL peacekeepers on Thursday detected 2 tunnels with 20 rockets inside, as well as another weapons cache containing rockets and fuses in Sector East. All of them were reported to the Lebanese army. That same day, UNIFIL peacekeepers supported the Lebanese armed forces in clearing a section of the road between Kfar Killa and El Adessa in Sector East, which had been blocked by debris from the recent hostilities. UNIFIL conducted 6 training activities with the Lebanese army deployed in southern Lebanon in July, focusing on patrolling, checkpoint setup, identification and disposal of unexploded ordnances, and counter-IED tactics. UNIFIL's Maritime Task Force, between March and July, carried out 18 training activities with the Lebanese Air Force and Navy on hailing procedures and response measures during maritime violations, as well as landing procedures. Turning to Syria, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says the clashes over the weekend in Asweda Governorate are hindering our access and aid delivery. Since the outbreak of violence last month, more than 190,000 people have been displaced across the governorates of Asweda, Daraa, and rural Damascus. Very few people, about 120, have reportedly returned to their communities, primarily to Salka district in Asweda. We and our humanitarian partners continue to support the response and to provide aid, but with access constraints and limited resources, much more is needed to meet people's needs. For example, OCHA reports that the clashes in Asweda Governorate over the weekend led to the temporary closure of the only humanitarian route to Asweda, which is used to deliver humanitarian aid and to evacuate vulnerable people. The route was reopened today. The main highway between Damascus and Asweda has remained inaccessible since the 12th of July. OCHA says that the impact of the fighting, including displacement, has also put immense pressure on an already overstretched health system in Asweda, as well as neighboring Daraa. Mobile medical teams are working to fill the gaps in Daraa. Maternal health services, trauma care, and non-communicable disease management must be urgently scaled up. Turning to Yemen, the International Organization for Migration is deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life following the reported capsizing of a vessel carrying more than 150 migrants off the coast of Shukra in Abyan Governorate in Yemen. Initial reports indicate that 68 lives have been lost. The International Organization for Migration notes that this heartbreaking incident underscores the urgent need for enhanced protection mechanisms for migrants undertaking perilous journeys, often facilitated by unscrupulous smugglers who exploit desperation and vulnerability. IOM calls for strengthened international cooperation to ensure the prosecution of those responsible for such criminal acts and to prevent further tragedies. Turning to Sudan, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is alarmed by the intensifying conflict, mounting civilian casualties, and worsening humanitarian conditions across the country. It's now been 842 days since the current conflict erupted. Our humanitarian colleagues note that heavy fighting continues in North Darfur State, with multiple reports of civilian casualties in recent days. In El Fasher, the state capital, clashes erupted on the 1st and 2nd of August, following earlier fighting between armed groups, including around the Abu Shuk camp for displaced people, which hosts 25,000 people. People in El Fasher are facing starvation. 1 year after famine was confirmed in Zamzam camp on the outskirts of El Fasher, the city remains under siege with no food deliveries by road in over a year. Prices for staple foods like sorghum and wheat are more than 4 times higher than elsewhere in the country, leaving many families unable to afford even the most basic items. Limited cash assistance continues, but is nowhere near enough to meet rising needs. In North Kordofan state, the town of Sumaima has reportedly changed hands multiple times in recent weeks, highlighting the volatility of the front lines. Civilians remain trapped and their access to aid remains heavily restricted. Meanwhile, cholera continues to spread rapidly across Darfur. In North Darfur, in the locality of Tawila, nearly 1,200 cases have been reported since late June, including about 300 cases in children and at least 20 deaths. The UN Children's Fund warns that the lives of more than 640,000 children under 5 are at heightened risk of violence, disease, and hunger in the region. In South Darfur, health authorities have reported more than 1,100 suspected cases and 64 deaths since late May, with the latest updates pointing to a case fatality rate of over 6%. shortages of medical supplies, clean water, and sanitation services are severely hampering the humanitarian response. In Khartoum state, the confirmation of landmines in multiple locations adds a dangerous new layer to the explosive threat already faced by civilians. Anti-personnel and anti-vehicle mines have now been detected in Mogran, Omdurman, and Bari. These devices are not only maiming and killing civilians, but also blocking access to health services, markets, and humanitarian aid. In Blue Nile state, floods in Damazin displaced more than 100 people and destroyed at least 200 tents at Al-Karama camp on the 1st of August, further compounding the challenges facing people who fled their homes due to conflict. Amid these overlapping crises, OCHA once again calls for sustained humanitarian access across Sudan and increased international support for vulnerable people in the country. OCHA's Director of Operations, Edda Mosornu, is in Sudan this week to assess the humanitarian situation. She will also meet with local officials, humanitarian partners, and people affected by the crisis. She will be joining the noon briefing from Port Sudan on Friday to brief you on her visit. Our colleagues at the UN Refugee Agency are telling us that by the end of the year, Uganda could be hosting 2 million refugees. This is happening as escalating crises in Sudan, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo have been driving an average of 600 people to cross the border daily in search of safety and life-saving aid. With 1.93 million refugees, Uganda is already the largest refugee-hosting country in Africa and the third largest globally. Uganda's progressive refugee policy allows refugees to live, work, and access public services. But UNHCR says that funding shortfalls are drastically impacting aid delivery and threaten to undo years of progress. Currently, Uganda's refugee response is only 25% funded. UNHCR is calling for more urgent and sustained international support and solidarity to ensure refugees and their local communities can live safe and more dignified lives. The UN Development Coordination Office informs us that on the 3rd of August, Caroline Tissot of Switzerland assumed her role as UN Resident Coordinator in Montenegro, following host government approval. She brings over 30 years of experience in development, humanitarian assistance, and peacebuilding. Meanwhile, Stephen O'Malley of Canada was appointed as UN Development Coordinator in Kosovo, effective on the 2nd of August. The reference to Kosovo is understood in the context of Security Council Resolution 1244. He will lead the UN Kosovo team's efforts to advance sustainable development, ensuring coordination with UNMIC. Both coordinators will support national priorities for the Sustainable Development Goals, in line with the reform vision of the Secretary General. Full biographies are available online. Thank you. I'm ready for your questions. Any questions? Yes, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. More than 600 former Israeli security officials have written to President Trump in hope that he can help secure an end to the war in Gaza. Does the Secretary General support their appeal?
The Secretary General supports all appeals for a ceasefire in Gaza. He has long believed that what is necessary is an immediate and lasting ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and unobstructed humanitarian access throughout Gaza. Yes, Sharife.
My question is just a little bit long, but it's interrelated, so I hope you can bear with me. So, from all that we have been following in this room, all the UN bodies, including the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly with 193 members, a majority of those, almost all of the United Nations Security Council members, and the United Nations Secretary General himself, they have been calling on so many instances to end the carnage in Gaza and also to prevent the West Bank from turning into a new Gaza. But it seems, we call the UN the organization responsible for maintaining peace. It's unable to stop Israel, and now Israel is planning to expand its military land operations in Gaza, and the calls for annexation of occupied lands is growing. So last week, I know there was another report on the UN 80 initiative. While the Secretary General is pushing forward with this to improve the workings of the UN, considering the current situation, does he think that the reputation and effectiveness of the UN can be salvaged from what it is right now?
He certainly does. The UN's reputation includes a proven track record of results for people around the world, whether you're talking about the decolonization efforts for the first decades of the organization's history, successful diplomatic negotiations in different parts of the world, or the humanitarian assistance that is keeping billions of people alive in places like Gaza and Sudan even now. The fact is, what is lacking at different periods of our history, and this is not the first time that we've pointed this out, is international unity. The UN is literally this, United Nations. If there continues to be disunity among nations, and particularly in the bodies of the member states, such as the Security Council, it hinders our effectiveness. But from our standpoint, we do believe that the UN80 reform process will enable us to achieve greater effectiveness at lower cost and adapt us to the realities of the modern world. But your point, of course, has been largely about the situation in Gaza, and Gaza is one of the cases in which the Secretary General has been working with and pleading with nations to come together, and that's still an essential thing to do.
Does he have a special call in regarding Israel's plan to expand military operations or annexation in the occupied lands?
There's no legal recognition of any sort of annexation, and he calls again on Israel to abide by international law. Regarding military plans, it's been clear for 2 years that there's been no military solution to this conflict. And meanwhile, there's been a vast amount of suffering and a vast amount of death. It's time for a ceasefire. Deji, and then Raid.
A follow-up with Serif's question, also on West Bank. It's been reported that the U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson went to Israel on a private trip, and during this trip he traveled to the illegal Israeli settlement in West Bank in Ariel. And what he said is, what I quote, being here in the place where our faith began, this has great significance. The Bible teaches that Judea and Samaria, which is the Israeli term of the West Bank, were promised to the Jewish people, and they belong to you by right. So given the fact this is a high U.S. officials' comments right there on the illegal settlement, what is the reaction from the Secretary General? Would he agree on this?
Our standpoint on the settlements, as you know, is that they are illegal under international law. And our standpoint on the West Bank is that obviously the Israelis and Palestinians are to negotiate a final settlement of their disputes with each other, but it has to be in the context of international law. And as you know, the Secretary General's support is for a two-state solution.
Technically speaking, if that's illegal settlement, so according to international law, would this action of being there himself illegal?
I wouldn't pronounce myself on whether simply being at a settlement is itself illegal, but the settlements themselves are in violation of international law. Right?
Thank you, Farhan. The far-right Israeli minister Itmar Ben-Gvir yesterday stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque compound with tens of settlers, violating again the 1967 agreement that allowed only Muslims to pray in the mosque. What's any reaction on that?
From our standpoint, what we insist upon is that all parties must uphold the status quo at the holy sites, and that includes, of course, the status quo at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yes.
Thank you, Farhan. I have a question on Syria, but I'm going to say I'm sorry in advance if you mentioned it already. The question is, clashes broke out again early Monday between Syrian Democratic Forces and Syrian government forces in northern Syria, and I wonder if Secretary General has any message for parties.
Yeah, what I can tell you is that the Secretary General is concerned over reports of clashes in Sueda Governorate in southern Syria. There also were some reports of fighting in the north of Syria. The Secretary General urges all parties to immediately stop the violence and restore calm. All parties are reminded of their obligations to protect civilians. He stresses the importance of ensuring safe access to essential services. It is imperative to support a credible, orderly, and inclusive political transition in Syria, in line with the key principles of Resolution 2254. Okay, have a good afternoon, everyone.